All right, we are back and we are working on Foxbody John, aka Black Hatch Around the Corner, is actually how I have him saved in my cell phone, because it's kind of how we nickname people this day and age. Me and Gary talked about it on the podcast, and he's actually saved as 92LX in my phone. One individual, though, that I have by his full name is Mr. Lewis here behind me. And he's here for the week helping me out because I've been just overwhelmed with a lot of other projects going on. And John's car, if you guys remember, I recently put the power dyne on this thing, and it had a couple gremlins before the power dyne went on that didn't seem to be that big of an ordeal. What would happen is the temperature would kind of creep up and then it would cool itself back down and everything would be okay, right? It would kind of just do that initially. Like when you first start the car up, it just kind of seemed like the gauge would go up, but then it would come back down and everything was fine. And John had been driving the car to work and back and forth, AC on, everything else. And it was just like, if you were really on it, the gauge would come up a little bit, and nothing like serious overheating. Well, despite putting the aluminum radiator in and upgrading the clutch fan and doing all those things, well, after the blower went on, guys, I was trying to do some data logging so we could get the tune updates. This car is actually on a quarter horse moat setup, and it's actually probably going to end up going to Mike Merlo in San Antonio, because it's just nice to sometimes get stuff on the dyno. And I've got some extra old school SCT chips, and this is a pretty, I guess, old school typical setup. You got trick flow heads, you have an Ed Curtis custom ground cam, Poly Systemax intakes, and you know what, maybe 5 pounds of boost through that power dyne. However, the boost amplified the overheating issue to the point where it was bubbling in the overflow tank. Like, when I mean bubbling, I mean we had like just, it was gurgling and bubbling and doing all types of things, which the reality is the pressure, or the cooling system rather, is getting pressurized, and that's not a good thing. So we went through all the basics, guys. There was no oil in the coolant, there was no coolant in the oil, right? The compression tests came back like flawlessly, 160 psi across the board, and no variances, no coolant leaking anywhere. However, it was bubbling and gurgling in here. Now, a lot of people don't want to always just run to the thoughts of having a blown head gasket. You know, it's not a job that anybody wants to feel like that they want to tackle or have to deal with. And the reality is, poor John has been without his car now for a good number of months. And it's to the point where I got the blower on and I got that text message saying, oh man, I'm so excited to actually get in the car again. I feel like, you know, it's been a while and I haven't been enjoying it. And he was excited. And then this problem started happening, and I've just been busy. And you know, this is like helping out a neighbor. This isn't like a scheduled project, if you will. And you know, poor John's been waiting to the point where he's almost demotivated and he's like, man, I don't know if I should just sell the car or what. So my apologies, guys. It's really windy, so I know the garage door is clanking and banging in the background there. But yeah, we are here. Lewis came to help me out this week just because, again, I've been so busy that it's hard to get to tedious things, and troubleshooting takes time, right? So we went through everything, thermostats and flushing radiators, actually swapping radiators, wondering if maybe it was a clogged one, so on and so forth. So the reality is, after doing all the testing, and you know, we could watch the gurgle happen. You know, when the car was up to temperature, it would skyrocket, and if I give it throttle, it would gurgle. I'd let off the throttle, gurgling went away. So we knew something was pressurizing. So Lewis, actually, I left him here alone today, and he took the end of the compression testing tool, and this is a nice kit. This is a OTC brand, And what it allows you to do is you can thread in whichever threaded, you know, insert you have on your cylinder head. And then it's got like a airline connection here. So what that actually allows us to do is that, you know, and this would actually be quite helpful if you were doing valve seals or you were doing work where you're trying to keep your valves up, this is like a poor man's leak down test without the gauges. So Lewis is just putting the airline right here into each cylinder, finding top dead center, right? So he started with cylinder number 1, and then he followed the firing order of the distributor. So that way he was hitting top dead center on each cylinder accordingly. So you can see right there, that is cylinder number 4, okay? And when the valves are closed and you put air in there, the air shouldn't go anywhere. And we're gonna hook this line up and we're gonna show you exactly where that air is going. Let's see. Yeah, he's got it around 70 pounds. And even though the piston's up at top dead center, it's got to fill up the cylinder, okay? And then it's got to go through wherever it's leaking from and fill up the cooling system to the point where we can see some gurgling. So you can see right now everything looks fine, so you got to give it a little bit of time. I can hear the air hissing going into the cylinder. Not hissing like there's a leak, but I can hear the air movement. There we go. 10 minutes later ish, maybe like 7 or 8, and we have bubbles in the overflow. So again, guys, it's taking time to build that pressure because it's got to go through that probably tiniest of little leak in the head gasket, and then it's got to fill up like everything. The heater core on this car is hooked up, so it would have to pressurize everything and actually go through a closed thermostat. Well, there's the bypass and then the little valve in the thermostat, but it needs to go through all of this and pressurize it all in order to create that. So be patient if you're doing a test like this. And that is the confirmation that the head gaskets need to be done. You like that whiz banger, don't you?
Yeah, I caught my paper towel.
Getting the surfaces all clean. Heads are all clean. Purple Scotch pad. You know, if you're really fighting stuff, WD-40 actually helps, but we didn't need to use any of that. You brake clean your surfaces, got our gaskets, got our thread sealant for these bolts all go into water jackets. So you need to make sure that you get your sealant on there, so I'll have to clean all these up. I think Lewis has already chased all the threads with a tap.
Yeah, threads are clean.
Threads are clean. Here you go. Pretty basic stuff. You can get that from Harbor Freight for like 15 bucks. So the reason why you want to make sure that all the threads are clean, both in the block and on the bolts, is so that you can get the proper torque specs when you go to torque everything down. Because if you've got stuff on them, that's actually going to create unwanted resistance when you go to torque stuff down. So make sure that's all clean. So I'm not going to go into details about putting the heads on in real time and talking about what we're doing while we're doing it. You know, it's pretty straightforward, guys. Follow the instructions, do your due diligence. And to be honest, everybody has an opinion. So, you know, I'm going to say something, somebody else is going to say, hey, do it another way. Everyone can do it their own way and whatever they feel comfortable with, as long as, you know, your motor's not overheating or blowing up or you're losing your head gaskets constantly, then it's a right way. Right?
That's right. Forward a little bit. Right there.
Ta-da! It's almost all back together. Wasn't easy. Nothing ever is. Well, sometimes it is, and that's just luck. So fingers crossed as final little gasket cleanups. Got a brand new lower to upper gasket here. Overnight parts from Summit.
That's a gasket set.
Yeah, gasket set. One piece that comes in 2 boxes. So we'll get this cleaned up here, intake back on. Coolant is mostly back in, we ran out, but there's enough in there to do what it needs to do. And we'll see tomorrow because it's late already. Hopefully this thing fires up and does what it needs to do and doesn't give us any more troubles. All right, so it is a day later, because we actually skipped Friday. We were busy doing other stuff. And John's car
Sucks.
is still not running. Well, it runs. But guys, this is one. Actually, the best comparison is when me and Gary were trying to get the ship box running before Detroit. And we were going through so much nonsense of like banging our head against the ground, trying to figure out why it wouldn't run right. Well, same thing here. It's like these black Foxbodies, I swear, it is a black Foxbody thing. So the car starts, it runs, it has a misfire. So we have gone through all of the steps. Now you have to keep in mind the head gaskets came off, intake manifolds came off, you know, fuel lines disconnected, cooling system drained, everything back on. distributor was out. So of course, you know, we did all the steps. We found top dead center. We got the distributor rotor facing cylinder number 1. We checked to see if the mass airflow sensor was on, because that can be another one that can make things kind of pop, ping, and sound like they're misfiring. All of those things are fine. So what do you do then? You check the essentials. Do you have compression in the cylinder? Because we changed the head gaskets. We checked the compression against all cylinders. They were consistent. They were exactly what you would want, exactly what you would expect. So we had compression. Then, do you have spark? So we did isolate and find out by using the pyrometer. Cylinder number 1 of all cylinders was not firing. We're not firing very well. You know, when you pull the plugs, you can inspect the plugs, and you could tell that plug, not only did it look like it wasn't firing, it wasn't even wet. So then we're like, okay, is this a fuel issue? You know, because we had tried swapping the plugs, we tried swapping wires. You can see there's a different color wire on number 1 here, because, you know, we're racking our brains trying to figure things out. Tested the wire, you know, against some metal with a screwdriver to make sure there was spark. It's like, okay, we have compression, we have spark. Well, where's the fuel? So we managed to get the fuel rail off. We get the injector out. We hook it up to 12 volts. Tick, 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 tick. It's ticking. We swap it with injector number 2. And same thing. Cylinder number 1, misfiring. And the car, because the rest, everything else is fine. In the car, we'd start it up now, but we've already run the fuel out of the rails. We've already drained the coolant, and we are in teardown mode right now to try and get this thing wrapped up. So what did it end up being? Well, once we had the injectors out, even when we had the spark plug out, we were using the scope here. And guys, I cannot like explain how handy this stupid little scope has been.
That tool's awesome.
Yeah, even Lewis is all about it. You can pick this up off Amazon. Okay, so the cap's on here. I gotta remember how to go through here. Is it this? Camera, video, pictures. There you go. So this is literally down the injector hole. And what do you see? You see the outline. See that blue? That is the outline of the gasket right here, okay? And the worst part is, so that must have been cylinder number 2. Cylinder number 1, what do we have there? We have a gap. Well, what does that mean? Well, 2 things. Number 1, the injector was probably spraying on the gasket, not allowing the fuel to get into the cylinder or down and, you know, through the head and past the valve properly, and sucking in air most likely through here, because that would be pulling air from the top of the intake manifold. So you guys might be wondering, well, okay, how'd you guys mess that up? Well, we're going to show you once we get the lower intake manifold off, because it all comes down to those head gaskets that we put in. Now, they're really nice head gaskets, but the problem is they don't have the little hook that stands up on the top here that the lower intake gaskets clip into and hold into position. So what happened was, when we put the lower on, guys, we were very careful because we knew that this was an issue. Well, the gasket did this, right? So the reality is there could be actually an issue down below, down over here in the back. We'll see once we pull everything off, but there's definitely an issue up here because we have air sucking in, and being unmetered air would cause a misfire. The fuel dripping on this section and not, you know, getting down into the runner properly is going to cause a fuel issue. So we have a fuel issue, we have an air issue, we have a misfire, aka a little bit of a backfire as well. And well, we got to pull the upper off, we got to pull the lower off. Thankfully, I've got another set of gaskets, so those are going to go in. And that is the long-winded story. This type of shit can happen to anyone. And we made the joke that this car's fought us as we've been trying to do things like the right way and follow procedure and everything else. This is one of those moments where, like, almost feels like if we hadn't cared so much, this type of shit wouldn't happen, but it's happened. So it's Saturday night. It's Lewis's last day or night, day and night in Texas. He flies out tomorrow, and he's determined that this car runs the way that it should before he leaves. So fingers crossed. I'll try and do a better job once we get I'm not going to do another time lapse of pulling parts of the motor apart again. So once we get that upper and lower off, we'll take a look at the gasket and show you exactly what was going on. Rookie move. So by the way, the reason why this is torn, we stuck a sharp object through the injector hole to cut that off, and then we vacuumed it out so we could do proof of concept to at least make sure if there was fuel getting down there, if the misfire would go away, and it did, other than a little bit of popping and pigging where you could see where it would have been sucking air right through there. So again, this is what happened. Gasket shifted down, and normally, right, when you have your Felpros or whatever head gasket you might have, there's usually part of that head gasket is sticking up here, and that results in you being able to clip that in right there. And well, we don't have that. So even though we had a little bit of gasket maker here to try and hold things in place, well, it didn't work. So rinse and repeat. Okay guys, so the next round of gaskets are set into place here. You can see this is a different version that has the EGR provision, which we've put the little supplied block off or whatever you want to call it on there. So what we're going to take note of, because of course we want to make sure, see how this gasket just wants to go like this, because it has nothing to hook into down here. So there's a little bit of gasket maker on the coolant ports. I think naturally things are going to move when we put this lower intake on. So we need to make sure that we can see this gasket on the top side here and here and here and there. And if we don't see that, we know we have a problem. So we can always at that point, once a couple of the bolts are set in and just kind of guiding the intake where it needs to be, at that point we can kind of get like a pick tool and pull up on the gasket if required to hopefully make sure we get it seated 100% in the right place. So we are going to evaluate the system that we're going to come up with, because of course AC lines and everything are in the way. You got to put our beads of silicone across the front and rear runners there so it seals the lower, and fingers crossed we fix the problem. So very, very carefully. Okay. So it's gonna go back. Oh, that's too. Okay, now
We're in the zone.
okay. Slowly descent. Well, we let the lower intake set up with the gasket maker. Definitely like to always retorque the lower intake. The 15 foot-pounds just doesn't seem like enough, especially when you're squishing down gasket maker. So it's sort of like do the initial one, then take 10-15 minutes, come back and then retorque them all. You'd be surprised, like probably get about an extra half turn out of everything. And you just really don't want leaks, which we had before. Usually take pride in my lower intake gasket work, and well, came back to bite us on this one, but who would have known with those gaskets? And we know what happened. This bypass coolant hose, that stupid little one down there, that's the 90 from the thermostat down your water pump. Well, that one was dangling, and when we were trying to set the intake in, I remember the bottom of the thermostat catching that hose and putting a little bit of resistance on things, and probably did sort of like this, push the gasket down, and yeah, we were in for a bad time. But we can now see gasket all the way along the top between the head and the intake manifold on both sides, so I think we should be good. There we go, guys. Always make sure your gaskets are in the right position. This project is now wrapped up, provided that there's no more overheating. That's why we will get the clutch fan installed, pour some coolant into this thing. But proof of concept, everything seems good. Until next time, we'll see you back on the infamous project.